Life is Fine by Langston Hughes. I went down to the river. I sat down on the bank. I tried to think but couldn't, so I jumped in and sank. I came up once and hollered. I came up twice and cried. If that water hadn't been so cold, I might have sunk and died. But it was cold in that water. It was cold. I took the elevator 16 floors above the ground. I thought about my baby and I thought I would jump down. I stood there and I hollered. I stood there and I cried. If it hadn't been so high, I might have jumped and died. But it was high up there. It was high. So since I'm still here living, I guess I will live on. I could have died for love, but for living I was born. Though you may hear me holler, and you may see me cry, I'll be dogged, sweet baby, if you're gonna see me die. Life is fine. Fine as wine. Life is fine.
The tone in this poem is sad because the author is expressing how after losing someone, he just wants to die. For example, quote, "If that water hadn't been so cold, I might have sunk and died." End quote. Quote, if it hadn't been so high, I might have jumped and died." End quote. These lines express sadness because the author just doesn't see a purpose of living anymore after his loss. There are two types of imagery in this poem. One is sight. The river and the bank and looking down the 16th floor building is used to show you what the author is actually describing that he's looking at. Then there's hearing. The man crying and yelling for help is an expression of actually what the noises that would be going on in the scenario of the poem. The point of view in this poem is first person because of the use of I. There is importance with the point of view being first person. It helps the reader gain sympathy towards the author, and it helps the reader understand easier what is happening to the man because it's him talking. The author uses symbolism when he says, quote, "So I jumped in and sank," end quote. This is symbolism because the man did not actually sink. It is symbolic because he might have actually felt like it was a huge weight on top of him, which is just like sinking underwater. The author uses repetition with the words cried, died, hollered, jump, life, and fine. These words are repeated throughout the poem for emphasis on how significant the actions are that he is doing. The theme the poem is portraying is how even though he lost someone, which made life seem unimportant, he still decides to continue with life. This poem has a very simple rhyme scheme, which is A, B, C, B. For example, open quote, "I went down to the river, I sat down on the bank, I tried to think, but I couldn't, so I jumped in and sank." You can see that the first line ends in river, and that would be A. The second line ends with bank, which would be B. The third line ends with couldn't, which would be C because it doesn't rhyme with anything before it. And the fourth line is sank, and that rhymes with bank, so that one was B too. The author uses a simile at the end of the poem by saying, quote, "Life is fine, fine as wine," end quote. I don't think there's any meaning behind the reason he says wine, he just uses it because it rhymes. Author Langston Hughes grew up in a divorced home and moved through family homes throughout his life. As a result of this, Hughes learned at a young age how to learn to move forward when people leave. Hence the reason of his poem when someone leaves his life and he just learns to move on and learns that it's not the end of the world. The meaning of this poem to me is to keep on moving forward. I believe the author of this poem lost someone who meant so much to him, and once that person was gone, he saw no reason to live. Once he was introduced to two opportunities to take his own life, he chose not to, and that was significant. The end of the poem is important because it shows a new amount of strength to live with. I chose this poem to do my presentation over because of how much change from the beginning of the poem to the end of the poem, like the emotion has changed so much. And I think that's really cool how he does that within just a minute of a poem.